Jeff, you still waiting?
It's loading right now. Okay, it's live.
All right,
We'll do it
welcome to the
live.
last or the final day of DEF 2013. Thanks you all for making it out. I know some of you have to make flights pretty quick, but we should have a good program of events here. I'm going to turn it over to Evan Johnson for the remainder of the day. He's going to kind of coordinate our guest speaker this morning and then walk us through the competition panel. So Evan, thanks so much. It's all yours.
Yeah, sure.
Morning, everyone.
Morning. I didn't really expect a response, but that's cool.
So here's the way that things are going to work today. So from 8:30 to 9:15, we're going to turn it over to Phill Nevels, who's going to talk a little bit about his experiences as an entrepreneur and where he's moved on to next. At 9:15, best part of the day, we'll have a break. And then it's going to be a little bit of a cluster. I asked that all people who are presenting come down and see Tony, Mike, and I at 9:15, just so we make sure we've got all your presentations synced up and we can go through the flow of how things are going to work. And at 9:30 promptly, we're going to transition to how the pitches are going to work. It's going to be we're going to have a pretty tight window to get everybody fitted in, so we're going to set aside 5 minutes for presentations, 4 minutes for Q&A, and then a 1 minute transition. So it's going to be, please stick to that timeline. We only have the room till 12 p.m. And so that way we can try and get everybody through, deliberated, awards given out, and we can move on from there. Okay. I'll go over a little bit more in detail about how exactly the pitches and the Q&A portion is going to work right before we start the pitches. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Phill Nevels. Phill graduated from Booth in 2010 and then was one of the co-founders and COO of Power to Switch, which is best described as a website to check electricity rate marketplaces. There we go. Which I was going to talk a little about, but very recently they were successfully acquired. By Choose Energy, which is backed by Kleiner Perkins, which, if you don't know, Kleiner Perkins is probably the big VC firm in the U.S. Phill is now over at Chicago Next, where he serves as the executive director. Anyway, without further ado, Phill.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. So I don't have anything prepared. I'm just going to come here and kind of tell my story. And please, if you guys have any questions whatsoever, just interject. And I would like this to be sort of a dialogue, right? So we can take up the full 45 minutes since I don't have anything prepared. So I guess I'll start with, I think this is a fantastic event. I think this is great. I wish more corporations would do something like this. There are a lot of corporations that they're institutionalized bureaucracy, really. And a lot of entrepreneurs talk about that as if it's a bad thing, as if it's a negative thing. And it's not necessarily so. It's just that it's not the only thing. If you have a big ship, you need rules, you need all those sorts of things to make sure it goes in the direction it needs to go. But I feel that entrepreneurship and thinking about fresh thoughts and fresh insights and just thinking about the future is a great way to determine the next steps for large organizations. So I think this is a fantastic event. So I guess I'll give you a little bit of my background before Power to Switch. I was electrical engineering undergrad. Thought I was going to come out and be an engineer, but as is the case with most lives, it never really goes quite the way that you expect it to go. And I came out, worked at Accenture for a number of years. So I worked at Accenture for something like 3 years in the Oracle practice. So we were there implementing large-scale Oracle solutions for large corporations. And as you can imagine, Accenture is an incredibly large organization, very bureaucratic. And so I did have some frustration there because I didn't feel like my thoughts and the things that I wanted to do didn't make direct contributions to the organization as a whole. And as a side note, I don't have a military background, but I did go to a military high school, Cobra Academy. If you're familiar with that, probably not. It's about 2 hours outside Chicago in Culver, Indiana. So I know a little bit about it, though I don't have a formal background. Anyway, I was at Accenture for a number of years. Never had any plans to be an entrepreneur. In my entire life, never had any interest in doing entrepreneurship. But what happened after Accenture, I worked at this company called Orchestria. which was a late stage startup. And that was my first introduction to entrepreneurship. And I thought it was fantastic that this organization that when I joined had something like 100 employees, and that it started with 2 people in the room, and they had grown it to this 100-employee enterprise. I just thought that there was something really fascinating about that. And so then I went to University of Chicago Blue School of Business here to learn a little bit more about entrepreneurship and find out those things that I didn't know I didn't know. Did that for 2 years. And while we were at Booth, that's where Power to Switch started. And so this is where our startup journey began. One point I wanted to make was around ideas. So, where do good ideas come from? And good ideas come from experience, right? You have a lot of situations where people think that they can sit in a room and just come up with a really good idea. And sometimes that happens. Yeah, you can have beers with your buddies and all that sort of thing and come up with some really good ideas. But the best ideas come from experience. Experiencing problems, experiencing frustrations in your job, whether you're in the military, whether you work in a corporation, whether you work in a nonprofit. Your day-to-day experiences are the best source of information for your startup enterprise. A lot of people try to think of cool ideas and then try to think of a problem that fits that really cool idea. That's very, very common. So you think of this app or that app in a vacuum and think that, okay, I'm going to find someone who wants to use this. But the best ideas are, you're living your day-to-day and there's something that's frustrating you and there's something that you wish there was a solution to, and that you may be the first customer for that, right? And that's where the best ideas come from. So another note about ideas don't have to come from you, right? I think that the best entrepreneurs at their core are passionate about ideas, no matter where they come from, right? And so I was actually the opposite case. When I went to University of Chicago, I thought I had this notion in my mind that to be a good entrepreneur, I had to come up with this fabulous, fantastic idea. And so Booth, University of Chicago Booth School of Business has a competition called the New Venture Challenge. And that's, a really popular new business. It's similar to what I think you guys are doing here later this morning, where teams come together, they come up with great ideas, and they have judges come in and judge them. So when I came to Booth, I said, I'm definitely going to do this New Venture Challenge. I'm going to come up with this fantastic idea, and then I'm going to, win the competition or whatever, right? So 2 weeks before school, I met this guy, Seyi Fabode, who turns out is my co-founder for Power to Switch, who was supposed to join us here today, but unfortunately couldn't be here. So I met Shay 2 weeks before school, and he had this fantastic idea for what became Power to Switch. And he asked me to join the team. And I said, no, that's a great idea. You have that idea, but that's not my idea. And I turned him down. I don't want to do that. I want to come up with my own wonderful, great idea. And so I ended up starting another company called Query, which was this market research platform. I knew nothing about market research. I knew nothing about marketing whatsoever. And so we both entered New Venture Challenge, him with Power to Switch and me with this other company, Query, and we competed against one another. Long story short, we both lost, right? But after the competition, I realized that my idea, as I mentioned before, it was created in a vacuum, right? I didn't know what the needs were. I didn't know what the problems were. I just thought I had this really great idea. And I realized that it didn't need to be my idea. He had a much better idea because his idea had been validated in the market. He had worked at a power station in the UK. He had worked in the UK where they had sites like Power to Switch. He saw that there was a huge demand for it and that people needed help understanding their electricity choices in deregulated markets. So he had a validated idea. I had an idea that came up within the vacuum. And so after the competition, after we both lost, we joined forces together. Now the reason that he lost, so I lost because I had a bad idea. He lost because he had a bad team, right? So that's kind of the next thing, right? So you have this fantastic idea. And I'm a strong believer that that you need a co-founder in any business. So whether you're a co-founder outside of any organization, you're starting a company, whether you're within an institution and you're trying to bring new ideas to that institution. I think in any scenario, you need at least one person to work with, right? And so for many different reasons. The biggest reason is that nobody can do everything. Nobody knows everything, right? Everybody knows something, a little bit, right? And in a situation where you have one person, you can't. It's very, very hard unless you're some all-star to start any business by yourself because you don't have all the skills that are required to start a business, right? But when you find someone else, that's the first important criteria for finding someone else to help you with your venture, is to find someone who has complementary skill sets, right? So where you are weak, they are strong, and where they're weak, you are strong. And together, I think there's a greater likelihood of success. And so with my co-founder, Seyi, obviously he had a lot of passion and knowledge about energy and energy markets. I knew nothing about it, absolutely nothing, right? So that's another thing. You don't need to be a subject matter expert in the things that you want to start businesses around, right? But in that situation, you probably want to find a co-founder or someone who does have some expertise in that area, right? And so in that scenario, we joined forces, and Seyi's a very very quiet, kind of stays in the background sort of guy, and I generally enjoy being out in front of people and selling and that sort of thing, right? So that's one example where we had a complementary skill set. So we joined forces, and this was in 2009, right? This is the fall of 2009. And we started Power to Switch. So, you incorporate, you do all that logistical stuff, all those little things. But then you have, we had a chicken and the egg problem, right? So real quick, Power to Switch, what it is, as Evan mentioned, it's an Expedia for electricity suppliers, right? So Illinois is one of 15 electricity regulated markets in the United States, where you have a choice in terms of who you get your electricity supply from, right? Is anyone from Chicago here? Who's from Chicago? Okay, just a few. Where are the rest of you folks from? Just throw out some states.
Ohio.
Texas.
Arizona, Texas, that's a
Yep.
hugely regulated market.
Yeah.
Okay. So Texas is a big market. Most of the East Coast, like New York, Ohio, New Jersey, Maine, all those states are deregulated, right? And so here we have a large company called ComEd, which is our energy provider. And most folks think that that's where you have to get your electricity from, right? But that's just not the case. There's actually something like 40 suppliers where you can get your electricity from. And generally, when you're shopping around, you're able to get it for cheaper than you would otherwise, right? So we had this site where anyone can come to the site, residential consumer or commercial consumer, can come to the site, they can see all their different options, and then they can choose a supplier that they want to switch to. It's very seamless, end-to-end process online, very much like an Expedia. And so this had not been done, at least in the state of Illinois. You do have some players in Texas. Texas is a very mature market, but there was no one in Illinois. And so for our particular problem, you have this chicken and egg because you have the suppliers. You need all the suppliers to be on the site, but you also need consumers to come to the site, right? The value proposition for the suppliers, they're going to be able to get to consumers at a lower customer acquisition cost, right? Than they would have been able to do previously. For the consumers, the value proposition is be able to go to one place at one time and see all your options and make it very, very easy for you, right? So, but which one do you do first? The suppliers, is really hard to get them to buy in because there's no consumers coming to our site. The consumers aren't going to come to our site if there are no suppliers on there, right? So at the end of the day, you just pick one and you just do it, right? So action is the cure to indecision, and we went with the suppliers and the supplier side. So we're in the middle booth, we're taking classes, we're coming to rooms like this, and we started calling up the suppliers, right? So there's no glamorous way to start a business. You just start doing stuff, and we started calling all these suppliers, and we're calling companies like Constellation, Direct Energy, First Energy. These are billion-dollar corporations, and we're two business school students who really have no idea what we're doing and just calling these folks. And so we did that for almost a year, actually. We got a lot of folks hanging up on us. We got a lot of people who didn't see the value in what we were trying to do. And we just kept calling. We kept trying to set up meetings. We kept trying to connect with folks who could make introductions for us to all these different suppliers. And we did this for a year. And we weren't getting anywhere until finally we got GDF Suez in early 2010, January 2010, to sign up for our site. And really, I think they did that just because they were trying to be charitable and help a startup out. But what that did for us is it kind of opened up the floodgates because they're a really large supplier, and when the other suppliers saw that GDF was signed up with this, many of them started to come onto the platform. And so it's January 2010. We have 2 suppliers on the site at this point, and you only need 2 suppliers to have choice, right? You just need A and a B, right? So that was enough for us to say, okay, let's launch a site. So that's the other thing, right? With startups and businesses, a lot of people, I think, have this notion that you have to get to this point of perfection before you can, publicize what it is you're doing. And that's also just not the case, right? If you have a good idea, do just enough, just what it takes, right, in order to be able to do what it is you say you can do, right? So for us, it was a simple landing page with a button where you could click, put in your name and your address, you click submit, and then we would get an email, and then we would start doing all the frantic back-end stuff, right? So, and it wasn't perfect, it wasn't what we wanted it to be, it wasn't what we envisioned it to be, but it was enough to get it out there and to experiment, right? So, thing about startups is just really, just one failure after another, right? It's just a series of failures, right? And the whole point is to see, how quickly can you fail, right? And how quickly and efficiently can you learn from each of those failures to go on to the next failure, right? And hopefully you're not making the same mistake each time that you do it, right? So we put this site out there. It was really, dirty, quick and dirty, and we started telling people about it. We just started emailing our friends and our family, and people started to come to the site, and they started to use, and they started to switch to suppliers, and we saw that what we were trying to do worked. The suppliers that we connected folks to on the back end, they were able to sign up these people, and these people started getting bills from these new suppliers. So end to end, the process worked. And this is January 2010. And so we're doing this with friends and family for a couple months, and we're getting to June of 2010, which is graduation, right? So now you're kind of out in the world, and it was nice and safe. We were within the school, and we could go to classes, and I was getting student loans to pay for everything, right? So now we get out, we have no revenue, we have nothing, right? But we were still encouraged, and we still had this dream that we could make Power Switch. And so that's another point I make, is that along the way you need to find champions for what it is you're trying to do, right? Because it can be very discouraging, right? Maybe you're in the military, maybe you're wherever, you're hitting brick walls in terms of trying to get your ideas out there, trying to get some traction. In our case, traction for us was revenue. Traction in your case might be revenue, it might be something else. It might be getting buy-in from senior leadership or whatever, right? And you're gonna hit a lot of roadblocks, and that's very discouraging, and startups generally are a very discouraging sort of enterprise, right? That's why I think it's really important to get champions along the way. And so when we're in this dark period where we don't have revenue, we don't have anything, we had a lot of champions who encouraged us, who pushed us to continue doing what we're doing. And that's another reason to have a co-founder, to have someone you're with, because it gets very challenging sometimes, and it helps to have someone to bounce ideas off of. So we get to June 2010, we have no revenue, we have nothing, and we graduate. Now, I got married 2 weeks before business school, right? Which, I would never recommend that as well. The second thing I wouldn't recommend is having your first child during business school. So 3 weeks before the end of business school, I find out that my wife's pregnant with our first one, Zoe, right? And so, I have no revenue, I have nothing lined up. So I had to take a full-time gig. I found a job and I took a job, right? I started doing Power Switch part-time, right? So that's another point. Things never go quite according to plan. You just have to be able to adjust to the scenario. So I take this full-time job at Nokia here in Chicago. And fast forward, doing this for about 10 months and doing Power Switch on the side. We're doing business plan competitions. Again, we're finding those champions. We're going to events. We're networking. We're finding those people who are going to encourage us and keep us in this game, because it was especially challenging when we're not doing this full time. So then we get to June 2011, and all of that networking and planting seeds and talking to people and finding champions, and that finally started to pay off, right? Because you got to plant seeds everywhere. And you just have to be really diligent and disciplined in terms of watering the seeds and all these different things so that they'll grow one day, right? So one started to grow in June 2011, and that's when we had an angel reach out to us. Is everyone familiar with like angel investors and venture capitalists? No. No? Okay. All right, so angels are typically high net worth individuals who are interested in investing in companies, right? Generally, a startup is going to go through different phases of funding. You're going to start with friends and family, perhaps, people that you know, close associates who have capital. Then angels would typically be kind of the next thing. These are these high net worth individuals. And then you start doing, venture capitalists and all these different things, right? So this angel, reached out to us. And this is very interesting because he reached out to us and said, "I'd like to learn more about your company." Now we had many of these conversations, and none of them ever seemed to go where. So we go to his website, and it's like it's like late '90s internet, right? It's like this black screen with like red font, and it looks like garbage, right? So we just blow this guy off, and we don't respond to him. So fast forward a couple weeks, and we say, okay, all right, let's reach out to this guy. So we go to this guy. He's in this nondescript office in River North, just small little room with just a desk in it. There's nothing else in there. There's no phone. There's nothing. Yeah, a laptop. That's it. And so we go in there, and we pitch this guy, and he's a young guy. He's like 33 or something. We pitch this guy, and he's like, I really like what you guys are doing. Why don't you come back next week and pitch it again? So we come back next week, and his father's there with him. So now it turns out that, are you familiar with the Cintas? I think that's how you, CINTAS, the uniform company, right? And so 10 years ago, they had this huge uniform company that they sold to Cintas for like hundreds of millions of dollars, right? These guys were like extremely, extremely wealthy. Didn't know that before. You wouldn't know that from the first appearances. And so we pitched the father, and 48 hours later, he says, we want to invest. So they invested $250,000 to our business. We were like, wow, we finally made it, right? So along with that, we got into this program called Accelerate, which is an incubator. It's an incubator here in Chicago. It's now part of the TechStars network. And I'm sorry, not incubator, Accelerate. Now, what an accelerator is, you have accelerators like TechStars, like Y Combinator. There are these organizations that bring a lot of startups together, and they bring a lot of mentors together, right? So again, that gets to that piece of finding champions and finding mentors to help you along the way. And so we were in this program, we had this investment, and we had access to all of these mentors who helped inform how we could grow the business, right? And so because with the ideas that you may have, right, you may not know how to get it from where it is today to where it's going to be. That's why you have conferences like this where you can all get in the room. You can start to bring your ideas together and come up with solutions, right? And so that's what that did for us. And so we were in this Accelerate program, and we had access to all these wonderful mentors. We did that for 3 months, and we had a venture capitalist reach out to us and say, we want to invest in you guys, right? And that was here locally. That was this firm called OCA. And so that's the next phase. Now, I don't know, if you're within the military, if you're trying to raise money, I'm not sure. And so this may not be of value to you. But raising money is, that's a business in and of itself. That's a very challenging thing. But what I'll say to that is that's a sales job, right? And so that's kind of the next point, right? With entrepreneurship, the number one skill set that you need to have, the number one without a doubt, is sales, right? That's the number one thing. No matter if you have technical abilities, no matter if you can do marketing, accounting, numbers, none of that really matters at all if you can't sell the business. And sales means a lot of different things. It's not just about getting customers, which of course, is really, really important. But it's also about selling stakeholders in your business. So in the military, I would imagine this is something hugely you're aware of, right? Is sales, sales, sales. At any given moment, you're always selling your business, right? You're selling it to potentially to investors. You're selling it to employees, people you're trying to get to join your venture and trying to help you along the way. We were selling it to our board, the folks who are helping determine the course of our business, so we're selling to them. And of course, you're selling to your customers, right? And it's, sales, sales, sales all the time. Now, I don't have a sales background, and a lot of people fall behind that and say, "Oh, I don't have a sales background, I don't know how to sell." Or you just start doing it, right? And you just start picking it up as you go. And so we started selling to all these VCs, trying to get them to buy into the vision and to believe in our organization. And we finally got one, OCA Ventures, that backed our company. And they put $1.3 million into our business, and that's where everything sort of started to really go right for us, right? So we had this investment. We were able. It's funny because once we got the investment, we were in the press, and once people saw us in the press, they assumed that we were this wonderful business, and we started getting all the support that we wouldn't have otherwise gotten. In our business, at this point, we still had the same minimal site that we had in January 2010. We had gotten all this way with just running on fumes and doing what we had to do and talking to people. But once we were in the press, everyone thought we were this huge business with all these employees. But really, it was still just two of us with this small little website. But when we raised the money, that all changed. We were able to hire employees. So we hired 8 employees. And so that's another thing, hiring and firing and managing people. So I'll say, being in the military is a huge, or affiliated with the military, is a huge asset in a startup environment, right? Because the number one thing, so sales is the number one skill set. The number one, if I learned anything in entrepreneurship, if you don't remember anything else that I said today, which you probably won't, the number one thing that I learned that's the most important is that people matter. People are the most important aspect of a business and starting a business. And by people, I use people generically because it's your employees, your investors, it's your customers, it's all these different groups. And so I went to University of Chicago Booth School of Business, as I mentioned, and Booth is a big finance school, and so I prided myself on taking all the finance courses, taking commercializing innovation with Professor Meadow, all these classes and learning all this wonderful stuff. But I didn't take any people courses. I didn't take any management courses. I didn't take any leadership courses because I thought that was all soft and fluffy stuff. That's absolutely the opposite. The opposite is true. I'd say, the biggest challenges that I had while at Power to Switch all involve people. For employees in particular, how do you inspire your employees? How do you encourage and incentivize them, especially when things aren't going well, which is, in our case, was most of the time. That was really challenging all along. How do you have a board that may be dysfunctional and players aren't working together well? How do you get past that, and how do you get them to make sure that the venture is successful, right? So people matters, leadership matters, and that's probably the most critical aspect of running a startup. So we got these investors. We hired 8 people. I'm going to fast forward since I just have a few more minutes. We went through 2012 with this team. Again, from failure to failure, experimenting, learning all along the way. And we got to a place where this year, in 2013, we had this company, Choose Energy, that reached out to us, right? And, acquisitions aren't something that just kind of happen. It turns out that the business development guy at Choose was also a Booth guy, so again, that network matters. And then we started talking to one another, fast forward 5 months, and we closed 3 weeks ago. So I've now moved on to this new role, and sorry, I just kind of went fast at the end, because I gave me this time here. I'm on this new role at an organization called World Business Chicago, which is Mayor Manuel was the chair, but it's like a public-private organization here in the city that's focused on improving the ecosystem for entrepreneurs, right? So I work with large companies. For the last 2.5 weeks, I've been working with large companies, and I've been working with startups and trying to find ways in which they could work together, right? Because, again, we tried to plant a lot of seeds and try to find those folks that would champion, that would help our business along the way. Now I'm in a role where I'm trying to facilitate that for other startups and other organizations in the city. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I want to leave it open if Nobody asks any questions during, so you may not have any questions. But if anyone has any questions, you got like 15 minutes. Sure.
Thanks for coming today.
Yeah, sure.
So in this new role, I know you just got there, but how do you make it an environment friendly for new ideas, for startups, and
Right.
Especially knowing that a lot of folks will be working on pet projects that they think can make a difference,
Right.
but they're doing it in their spare time. It's not a full-time job.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it is very challenging when you have folks who want to do business, but it's not their full-time job. Right. I think a big role that I play is getting all the right people in the room. So again, a lot of the stuff that you think is soft and squishy, it doesn't really matter. Absolutely matters. If you get you have an idea, you're working full-time doing whatever, right? And there's somebody else in your same boat who wants to do a venture, who's doing full-time. They just don't know quite how to get there. Simply putting those two people in the same room at the same time where they can have a conversation with one another is hugely important. It's hugely impactful. When you do that, when you share ideas, each individual idea becomes that much better, right? So in my role now, particularly with corporations and startups, it's really about just bringing them together in any sort of context, right? So, for instance, small example, something we're doing is called a corporate challenge, where literally we get startups in Chicago, we put them in a room, we let them pitch to companies like Walgreens, Allstate, Molex, et cetera, et cetera. And then those companies are able to see how those startups can solve problems that they may have, and then you can just create a relationship. So I'm just in a relationship with creative business, is basically all I'm doing right now. So.
Thank you.
When looking back at how you went to school and education and all that, and
Right.
you talked about, I know things about how to do business, but I don't really know the technical side, which is why you surround yourself. How would you weight business school courses versus technical courses in a particular field that you want to start up in? How would you balance
Right.
what you should focus your education on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, one underlying that is what's the value of business school? You get that question a lot, and what I would say to that is the most valuable aspect of business school in particular is meeting people, right? I met my co-founder there. So if you ask me the number one what I got out of business school, it was meeting my co-founder there, and then on, right? Because the fact of the matter is, if you don't have business skills, or if you don't have those particular technical skills, there's someone else who does, right? So it really becomes your role in terms of marshaling those other individuals, either to join your team or to support your team as advisors or what have you, right? And so at the end of the day, to more directly address your question, I'm a big fan of doing what you're passionate about, right? If there's certain technical things that you're very interested in learning and doing, then you should do those things, right? If you're interested in learning about business and learning about accounting and economics, all these different things, then you should do that, right? I'm a huge fan of life kind of just takes care of itself, right? If you're doing what it is you want to do and what you're passionate about. You're going to be the best at what you do if you're doing what you want to do, right? So, but you absolutely, you don't need to go to business school to start a business. That's absolutely, you do not need to do that. You don't need to go to college to start a business, right? You just need, the number one thing you need is passion. You need to be able to sell. You need to be able to work well with people. And you need to be able to marshal resources where you're lacking in a certain skill set. That's all you need. And endurance, too. Any other things?
I'm a member of the American Region Small Business Task Force in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
But I represent the whole state of Illinois, American Region. And we'd like to somewhat partner with you.
Okay.
And we're connected to an innovation center. The Illinois School of Technology and Professional University.
Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we do. That's what World Business does. So you have there's a big incubator here called 1871, which is a big startup space, which is in the merchandise mart, which is not too far from here. You've got that. You've got IIT. You've got U of I. You've got the Illinois Technology Association. You've got the ISTC, which is the State Illinois Technology Association. You've got all these different organizations, and what I do and what World Business Chicago does is ensure that they're all working together to specifically improve the technology ecosystem here in the city. Ultimately, the goal of that and the goal of what I'm doing is to create jobs, right? That's Chicago is kind of slower in terms of recovering from the whole economic disaster that we had the last several years. We're one of the slower cities to come back from that. Unemployment is still relatively high here in Chicago, something like 10.4%. And so jobs is a big focus of what we're trying to do too.
In the early stages, when you were starting, at what point did you shift from just trying to get people to pay attention to trying to make money?
Right. So once we raised money, that was kind of the inflection point for us, because a big driver of our early growth in terms of consumers was the press, right? So once we got some press recognition, we just started having a lot of people on the site. So with any startup, 10 things need to happen, and those 10 things are going to be different for every business. If 9 of those things happen, the startup won't be successful. And at least 3 or 4 of those 10 things are just magical things that you have no control over, right? And so you can work hard, you can stay up late, you can do all that stuff, but that's only to get you 6 out of 10. There's still something that needs to happen. For us, it was the press. The press got a lot of traction to our site. Another thing we did, our big go-to-market is we focus on strategic partnerships as well. So we partnered with like AOL, the Tribune, the Sun-Times here in Chicago. We partnered with Cars.com, all these different sites that were highly trafficked, that were getting tens of millions of visitors a month. We would have a presence on those sites, like a widget where you could, I want to switch my electricity and save money. When you would do that, you would come to our site, and that's Mint.com, which is a subsidiary of Intuit. So we had all these different partnerships that kind of drove traffic for us. Sure.
I was just curious. I've actually used your website before. Yeah,
awesome.
and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, cool.
This might sound, and I don't mean it flippantly, but like the Obamacare website.
Yeah.
You guys kind of are in the same type of thought, right? Like
Right.
you offer a choice of solutions.
That's right.
And then people pick.
That's right. Yep.
Did you ever consider like going into that market, or do you just think it was too big for you guys right now?
So
because it's a similar
Right.
platform, you know.
Right. So that's another. Actually, I'm glad you bring that up, because that's another huge point of any successful business. The number 2 thing is, I've already used number 1 a couple times here. The number 2 thing is focus, focus, focus. Right.
Yeah.
So whatever your ideas are, whatever it is you're trying to champion in whatever organization you're part of, you need to focus on, okay, what is success? What am I trying to accomplish? What can I do well? And that's going to be like one thing, right? And you just focus on that one thing, and nothing else. You have blinders on to everything else until you get to a point where you've either proven or disproven that that's the right idea, and that's how you should focus. At that point, maybe you need to shift your focus, but again, then you're only focusing on one thing, right? So there are a lot of times where there are a lot of different things that we want to get into and want to experiment with, but in a startup environment, you're resource constrained from time, money, human capital, and any of those things, we would have been spreading ourselves thin across a number of different things. So no, we focus on switching electricity.
I wish you guys did, because it probably would have been better.
Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. All right, thank you very much.
All right, so we're gonna. We're still waiting on a couple of the judges to come forward. They should be here right around 9:30. So go ahead and take a break. People who are pitching, real quickly. People who are pitching, if you could come down and CD, just so we make sure that we have all your stuff lined up and ready to go.